All right, so it is now 3 o'clock, so I am going to get started with today's workshop. Hello, everyone. My name is Sam DeZerga, and I'm the Academic Success Coach in the Learning Commons. And today we are going to go over study strategies for essay or free response type tests. I am doing these workshops all week, so at 1 p.m. I am doing test-taking workshops for both multiple choice and essay type tests, and then at 3 p.m. it's going to be study strategies for multiple choice and essay type tests. So definitely come back tomorrow for the multiple choice version of these workshops. With all of that being said, let's go ahead and get started. So today's workshop objectives, we are going to identify study strategies that prepare you for writing a free response test, demonstrate how cramming is detrimental or harmful to your performance on a free response test, and then we're going to work together on constructing your personal study schedule, something that you can take with you after this workshop and really apply this week heading into next week, finals week. But first we have to ask ourselves, what is a free response test? And if you watched the test-taking strategies workshop earlier today, you know that a free response test is either a short answer or an essay type test. And these measure your ability to organize, think critically, and to communicate information, knowledge, or skills. And it really goes back to Bloom's taxonomy, which we see on the right. It's this pyramid with objectives. So remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. And most free response questions measure higher level learning. So these are usually on the pyramid, apply and above. You would typically read Bloom's taxonomy, this pyramid here from the bottom up. So a free response test is likely going to ask you a question. If it is an essay type test, some of these higher level learning questions. So let's get into some study strategies. Today we're not going to talk about, when the test is in front of you, what do you do when you actually have the test? We're going to talk about what you need to be doing prior to the test. So what you need to be doing right now in order to prepare for writing that essay, taking that essay or free response test, and how you can be successful. Let's hop right in. First things first is you want to ask yourself, is the test cumulative or is it the last module only? So when I say cumulative, I mean from the beginning of class until right now, it's all free game. It might be on the test. It's not limited to any chapter or module. It's just everything. You're going to study for that test very differently from how you're going to study for a test that is, say, the last month or the last module that you've studied in your class. It's a really good question to ask yourself, but if you can't find that answer, look in your syllabus, look on Canvas, and if you can't find it, go ahead and ask your professor, is this test going to be cumulative or will I be tested on only this last information since our last test? You also need to ask yourself whether this is an open or closed book test. So are you going to be able to use any materials or outlines, or do you have to go in with only the knowledge in your head and going for it? Are there going to be all free response questions, or are there going to be other types of questions too? That will change your study strategy a little bit. If you only have essay type questions or free response questions, then you're going to really focus your studying on those essays. But if you've got other types of questions too, say true or false or multiple choice, you'll likely have to use some other study strategies so that you are really covering those areas that are going to be covered with those questions too. Something else to ask is how much time are you going to have to take the test? Are you going to have 60 minutes? Are you going to have 90 minutes? And how many questions are there on the test? How many free response questions? This is really going to tell you, how much time do you have per question? Am I going to have time to outline before I start writing that essay, or do I really have to just hit the page and really start writing the second I get that question. And then something else that is typically limited to a free response or essay type exam is that sometimes you're given an option. Sometimes you're given, say, 5 different essay topics and you have to choose 3. Ask yourself, are you going to have to answer all of the questions, or are you going to have a choice? Typically, if you are going to have a choice, your professor will have mentioned this, but it's always something that you could bring up if you are unsure as to whether every question will need to be answered or if you will have that choice. So let's talk about the role of notes. So any study strategy, regardless of what kind of test this is going to begin with your notes. So step 1 is to keep everything in one place. You want to organize a folder, a notebook, a binder, something that is going to keep all of those notes all in one place. Those notes, any handouts that you've been given in class, if you have any study guides, any assignments that you've been given back, and even better, if you have any tests, paper tests that you've had in this class that have been graded and turned back to you, keep all of those in one spot. You want this to be organized as you're heading into finals week. Step 2 is to, at least once a week. So right now, go through and just read all of your notes, every single note that you've got, but pay special attention to potential essay or free response topics. The question is, how do you know what to look for though? In some circumstances, your professor may have already given you the topic to your essay or the topic to your free response question, but in some cases, you may just go into the test without any knowledge as to what that question is. So the question then becomes, how do I know how should I know what I should look for? And so that's really where Bloom's taxonomy, or the pyramid that we see on the right-hand side, comes into play again. We've got all these objective words. We know that the question is going to ask us about one of these things. And so when you're looking in your notes, what you really want to look for are broad or general overarching concepts, themes, or main ideas. You want to look for step-by-step processes and how these are applied. You can look for a sequence of events, including people involved in those events and what the outcomes were. You want to also take a look back at your class syllabus. And on the first page, there is usually something called a class objective or class objectives. This is what you are expected to learn in the class. And this might be a key way of finding out what you are going to be asked on a test. And so you want to look in your notes for information that is going to answer or solve whatever that class objective is. Remember, this is what you need to be learning in the entire class. And something else you might want to look for are themes that are found throughout the class as well. If there's something that comes up chapter after chapter, module after module, and it just keeps coming up and it's reiterated every class and your professor continues to bring it up, it's probably highly likely that that is going to show up on the exam. You also want to look for examples and real-world applications. So, if there's an example of something, say, a method or theory and how that's applied in the real world, you might want to look at those examples, because an essay may ask you to provide examples or to elaborate on a real world application of that theory. You also want to look at information that has previously been compared and contrasted, because a common essay type question is to compare and contrast. You also want to look for any major issues, arguments, or debates, or relationships between big ideas and different concepts. A tip, though, is that while study strategies do begin with your notes, they do not end with notes. Simply reading over your notes it's not studying. It's simply reviewing your notes. And so you need to pair your notes with another study strategy. Like I said, simply reading over your notes is not studying. And so there's really a 3-step process for studying for an essay or preparing to write an essay or taking a free response test. And that is to predict, to outline, and then to practice. So predicting, that's the first step. That means predicting your essay question. Now, like I said, in some cases, your professor may have already provided you with the essay topic, but in other cases, you may go in without any knowledge of that. And so if you are left predicting what your essay question is going to be, look at things like your chapter titles and subtitles. There may be relationships between key terms. Ask yourself how the information could be applied to a real life situation. And then with all of that being taken into consideration, go ahead and write down some potential questions that could be an essay question on an exam. The second step is going to be to outline, and this is where you want to brainstorm answers to those questions. You want to jot down any key terms, and then you want to organize these keywords into an outline that will eventually become your essay response. And then at that point, you want to practice. So you've made your outline, you want to review that outline. At that point, you then want to, on your phone, set a timer for 15 minutes. And then you want to write a short introductory paragraph using your outline as a guide. The important piece here is that you do not want to rely on your outline. So you don't want to just sit there with your outline in front of you and, simply copy over what you've written on your outline as an introductory paragraph. No, instead, focus on the paper in front of you, what you're writing, keep your outline out to the side, but try to remember what you've written. Try to remember those details. Write down your deeper understanding of what you've written. Remember that introductory paragraph, the only thing you're writing right now, should just answer the question that's being asked. And it sort of tells you what you're going to be talking about in the rest of your essay. You don't have to elaborate too much. You don't need to include too much information. Just include enough that answers the question and tells me what you're going to tell me in the essay. All right, so practice again. After you've written your introductory paragraph, you want to practice your 3 body paragraphs. And so once again, you've set the timer for 15 minutes, you've written your introduction, take a break, take some space, and then when you have a free 15 minutes, go ahead and set that timer for 15 minutes again. And one at a time, write those body paragraphs. It does not have to be perfect. Remember, this is just practice. This is not your perfect, submitted essay. This is simply practicing, and it's simply preparing you for taking that timed test later down the line. So let's look at this essay study process in action. First, let's go ahead and try and predict. So right here, we are looking at headers, so a chapter title and headers and subheaders of a textbook. It looks like a science textbook. We see that body temperatures and its regulation, normal body temperature, heat gain and heat loss, and then processes by which heat is lost and avenues of heat loss. Looking at this, I could probably make a pretty good prediction as to what the essay question is going to be. So you could take a moment and just sort of jot down what you think, if these were your chapter titles and subtitles, what that essay topic would look like. All right, so this is what the essay topic that this student has read through the chapters and the subheaders and determined that this is the likely essay topic that they will be tested on when they get their final exam. Explain what you understand about normal body temperatures, then contrast the processes by which the body uses chemical thermoregulation to gain heat versus physical thermoregulation to lose heat. Finally, Analyze the environment factors that must be present in order for a human to maintain normal body temperature. With that in mind, let's go ahead and look at our chapter titles and subtitles again, and you can see how they could come up with that question. You can do it too with your textbook, with your notes, with your PowerPoints, with the titles of your modules. Every week, if you've got a different header in Canvas, look at all of those and come up with one on your own. But then it's about outlining. So you've predicted the question, and now let's outline. This student here has come up with an outline. It looks just like your notes with bullet points. You don't want to go into too much detail. You just want to write down those key words, main ideas that you know you will want to include to answer the question. And then practice. So this is an example of an introductory paragraph. Like I said, you don't want to over elaborate in this introductory paragraph. You simply want to answer the question, use your outline as a guide, and come up with that intro paragraph where you have a thesis statement and you just tell me about what you plan to write more about in your essay. But there is the understanding that sometimes you are short on time. Not everyone takes, a full week to study or 2 weeks to study for their exam or to prepare for an essay type test. If this is you, if this sounds like you, then try to at least make it to step 2. So make sure that you are taking some time, if you haven't been given the essay question, to predict what that question is going to look like. And then at least make it to the second step there, which is outline. So at least try and outline what you want to write once you do get that test. You don't always have to practice. You don't always have to practice writing the entire essay. If you can practice the intro paragraph, that's going to take you a lot further. But in the end, try to make it at least to that outline stage. And if you actually don't have to predict your question, you are far ahead of other students. You can skip directly to the outline step and be good to go. So I mentioned that not everyone takes a week or 2 to study. And so I'm going to talk to you about cramming and why this is detrimental or harmful to your success on these types of tests. So the question is, what is cramming? So you know that the final exam is coming up. You have heard your professor talk about it in class for weeks now. You know you'll get to it later, maybe this weekend, maybe not. You don't really have enough time during the day to sit down and to study. Now it's Sunday. Your exam is Monday morning and you're stressed. You are stressed out at this point, and you know that you have a lot to read. You know that there are some concepts that you don't quite understand yet. You've got a lot to learn and you have so much to study. And even though you're stressed out to the max, you actually don't begin studying until after dinner that night. But you know you've got this. You've done this before. You've got this, right? So you spend the next 7 hours in a marathon study session, studying to the best of your ability, reading this, reading that, multitasking, going here and there before you end up dozing off in your textbook at 2 in the morning. But then your alarm rings at 7 a.m. sharp. So the question is, are you a crammer? So does this sound like anything that you have done before? Sometimes cramming isn't that extreme. Sometimes it's still waiting until the last minute and participating in unorganized, unplanned studying. So the question once again is, are you a crammer? So like I said, cramming, it's last minute. It's usually done the night before or the morning of a test. It really depends on just how bad it is. It could be the day before a test, the weekend before a test. And usually this type of studying is unorganized. So you usually don't go into this type of studying with a plan. We're going to talk more about a study plan. in just a little bit. And usually you go into a cramming study session with a hope for the best mentality, meaning that you just sort of review everything and just cross your fingers and hope that you've covered what is actually going to be on the test. And that's what we're trying to avoid here. So this is what a study calendar of someone who crams might look like. So notice that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, we don't have any studying or class review or anything here. But then we get to Sunday, and at 1 p.m. we decide, it's really crunch time at this point. My test is tomorrow, it's Monday, and so you spend the next 6 hours switching between POS 1041 and AMH 2020. But at the same time, you like to have your TV on in the background, sort of that white noise. You continue to check your texts. Friend FaceTimes you cook dinner, you cook and eat dinner, and everything's still in front of you. And so it's not necessarily 6 hours purely dedicated to these two classes. Something that I hear a lot from students is, I cram, but it works for me. I prefer it, I do well, and that's fine. But research has found that spacing out your studying is more effective than cramming 90% of the time. However, 72% of students believe that cramming has been beneficial to them in the past. The question there is why? Why do students feel like cramming has been beneficial to their own success? And there could be many reasons for this. So it could be that we are more likely to remember all of the times that it has worked than all of the times that it didn't work. It could be that it's really difficult to admit to ourselves that cramming is a problem and to admit that we need to break a habit of procrastination. I know that that can be really tough for some students and for all people really. Procrastination is inevitable, but it is something that can be broken. And you also have to ask whether or not you truly learned the material that you crammed. Did you really learn it? Can you use it a week from now? Or are you just sort of cramming it in one side so that you can regurgitate it on the other side? That's different from learning. And for classes, especially classes like math or science, where you have to take what you've learned in one class and then the next semester you go in and you've got to still apply what you've learned from the class in the previous term, it's really important that you are truly learning and not just cramming that information and hoping it fits. Something else that I always ask students is, you may have passed the test cramming last time, but did you do as well as you could have done if you had really taken the time and dedicated your time to studying? Or if you had started preparing for the test a few days out, a week out? If you had organized your notes from the beginning of the semester, how well could you have done if you had done all of those things? So something to really ask yourself and determine whether or not that this is something that you want to change about the way that you study. So a study tip is, just because you passed does not mean that you were successful. Ask yourself also, how did you feel while you were cramming? Did you feel calm or did you feel really stressed out? Because if you were feeling really stressed out, if you were sort of anxious and feeling unsure, then that's not good study time. You're in the back of your mind always going to be thinking of 12 hours until the test. Oh, I'm stressed out. Oh, I'm going to fail. Those negative thoughts start creeping in, and that's going to be harmful to your success as well. So let's very briefly talk about learning and long-term memory. So think of a free response or essay test as a game of being able to understand and to recall details from your long-term memory and to be able to write all of those down on the day of the test. So the question is, how does that information get into your long-term memory, and how can you make sure your studying helps that information go into your long-term memory? And this here, I promise it's not complicated, but as you receive information, so as you read something, or as your professor tells you something, or you read something on a PowerPoint, that information comes into your sensory memory. And if you pay attention to it, so if you're listening, if you're paying attention, that information is going to flow into something called your working memory. This is the part of your brain where you're able to work with information. Now, this is a really important piece of memory. You have the option at this point to either forget it. So if it's not important, if you've determined it's not important, it can just leave your brain and it can be forgotten forever. But if you do any of these things, if you attach it to other information that you've already learned, so previously learned information, if you make a connection between what you've just heard and something else in your mind, if it's important to you, if if you know that you need to remember it, if you do any of those things, it can be passed into your long-term memory. And once it's in your long-term memory, you are able to retrieve it for future use. And for it to stay in your long-term memory and be used for even longer, you have to do something called rehearsal. And rehearsal is really what you're doing when you are studying. So when you cram, things sort of stop at working memory. It stops the learning process here. And what does that lead to? It leads to things being forgotten because you're not doing this process of encoding or attaching that knowledge to something else you already know. You're not building those connections, building those relationships. And so it's not making it into long-term memory. Now, instead, what we really want to make sure you're doing is this encoding and retrieval process and rehearsing it while you study. And that's something that creating an outline is going to do. It's something that reading notes is going to do. It's something that practicing an essay is going to do. And this process is called recall. The ability for you to take what is in your long-term memory and to pull it back into your working memory so that you can use it as you need to on a test. That's called recall, and that's what you need to do on tests. And let's not forget the important role of sleep in all of this. So sleep is so important for your success. Even though you're sleeping and your body is not active, your brain is so active when you sleep. This is where learning is really solidified and organized. In your sleep, your mind tries to make sense of everything that you've learned in the day. And this is really where those long-term memories are going to be established and solidified so they can be recalled for later use. And sleep is also really important for recovery and preparation for the day ahead. So if you think during the day, your energy levels, they decrease and decrease and decrease. When you sleep, that sort of recharges you. It refills and recovers you for that next day. So now that we've talked about different strategies for studying, the question is, how do you set a time to study? How often should you study? How long should you study? How long to prepare for these types of tests? And so what I would encourage you to do is something called distributed practice. And this is where you space out your studying over a longer period of time. So, start now. Your exam is probably next week. And so you still have a week before that exam. And what you need to do is just set a timer for 30 minutes or 15 minutes twice and do this 2 to 3 times a week. I know that probably sounds like such a little amount of time. It's not very long at all. But remember that it's not about how long you study, but about the way you use that study time. And an uninterrupted 30 minutes is going to be much better for you. And when I say uninterrupted, I truly mean uninterrupted, undisturbed, truly focused on one task. No TV on in the background, no music, notifications off, not on the internet, solely focused on that one topic, that study topic. That 30 minutes is going to be so much better for you than sitting down with a textbook and reading for 6 or 7 hours. Because I could promise you at the end of that 7 hours, you're not going to remember as much as you think you do. 30 minutes of uninterrupted time, that's quality study time. A way that you can do this is to do something called chop it up. And this is where you chop up your time by working on small tasks. So you want to set a schedule that reflects your priorities as a student. So if your priority is to pass the exam, then your priorities may be different than someone who has the goal of getting 100 on the exam. So you really want to set a schedule that reflects your personal priorities. What is your goal? What grade are you hoping for in the class, and what goal do you have for this exam? You then want to write out those tasks on a piece of paper and then cross them off as you complete them. And then, like I said, you really want to focus on only one task at a time. You do not want to multitask, and that could be anything from notifications on your phone, getting up to cook, listening to music, any of that. Those are all multitasking and are really detrimental to your study time. So what I have here is a mock study schedule. As you can see, I have Monday through Sunday on here, and I have written, it's an hourly schedule with 15 to 20 to 30 minute little study sessions. This is actually a really great study schedule here. You saw on our first example where I was studying for POS 1041 and AMH 2020, I was keeping that all on Sunday. And I was studying for 6 hours starting at 1 p.m. But what if on Tuesday, all I did was study for 20 minutes for that history test? Or what if just here and there, I dedicated 15 minutes to POS 1041? I used those 15 minutes to outline. I used those 15 minutes to read over my notes. I used that 20 minutes to write the intro paragraph to the essay that I'm going to write. This here dedicates 3 hours to each class, but you wouldn't know it just by looking at it because you're only dedicating 15, 20 to 30 minutes here or there. So after you've studied, you also want to monitor your study time and sort of evaluate how it's working for you. After a study session, very quickly, summarize what you covered during that time, whether that be, during this study session, I looked at my notes and the main idea covered was blank. Or I outlined my essay for history and I believe the topic is this, and my main idea is going to be blank. You may want to explain what you've learned if you've got a classmate that you've been studying with, a friend, a family, to yourself. I know we're all socially distancing right now, so you may be limited in the number of people who are currently around you. But also ask yourself, how do you think it went? Do you ever ask yourself these things, sort of take an evaluation of your own studying? At this point, if you feel like your studying maybe wasn't that great, you don't feel too good about it, you have the decision to stick with this study method, or you can change it up. And if you need to change it up, you can always reach out to Success Coaching and we can find a study strategy that works best for you. So with all of that being said, I do want to wish you good luck during your finals. If you have absolutely any questions about study strategies, whether that is for an essay type exam, multiple choice exam, or if you need test taking strategies for either of these, please feel free to reach out to me. You can email me at dzurgas@tcc.fl.edu. And thank you so much for coming today.